Bonjour and welcome back to the World History course. This is your professor, Philippe Girard. In this section, we covered the early history of the world's great religions, from Hinduism to Islam. Now for something completely different. To end this section, we will look at the none of the above category, the people who don't believe in God, i.e. the atheists. First, a word about terminology. What do we mean by atheism? Well, theos is a Greek root meaning God. You already know about monotheism, the belief in a single God, and polytheism, the belief in many gods like Hinduism. Well, atheism starts with a negative prefix that means no God or godless. So atheists are people who don't believe in God. It's simple enough. But then you may have heard of agnosticism as well. Agnostics are people who are not sure about God's existence. They have some serious doubts, but it's impossible to prove a negative, so they think that ultimately you can never be 100% sure that there is a God or not. So agnostics are the undecided. Another term you may have heard is deism. That term has a Latin root that means God in general. So deism refers to people who think that there is some kind of higher power, but not necessarily the God of the Jews or the Christians. They tend to be non-denominational, i.e. they're not aligned with a particular religion. Also, the God of the deists is very hands-off. He's not actively involved in every aspect of your life. Think of that God as a watchmaker. He or she created the world, just like a watchmaker builds a clock, but then the world proceeds on its own, just like a clock works on its own after it is built. Deists believe in free agency. They, rather than God, control their everyday life. So, atheism means no God, period. Agnosticism, there may be a God, or not. I don't know. Deism means that there is a God somewhere, but it's not the God of a particular church, and you are on your own. You will also hear some atheists refer to themselves as secular humanists, so let's go over that term together. Secular simply means non-religious. Humanism refers to how people should interact with their fellow humans, i.e. ethics, a sense of right and wrong. So secular humanists are atheists, but they also don't think that human beings are random life forms involved in a life and death struggle for survival. Secular humanists care about right and wrong. They care about other people, even if God does not exist. Let me throw one last ism at you. Anti-clericalism. It's a long word, but its meaning is simple if you break it down. Anti means against something. For example, anti-Semites are people who don't like Jews. Well, clericalism refers to clerics, i.e. the church. So anti-clerical people are not just atheists who don't believe in God, they are also actively opposed to the notion of an organized church. They don't think it's possible for atheists to peacefully coexist with hardcore religious zealots side by side, because religion is bad for everyone in society, even non-believers. The church promotes silly ideas instead of science, for example, so it holds back progress. Or the church tries to ban abortion access to everyone. As a result, anti-clerical people want to limit the influence of religion in public life. Think of them as militant atheists. All right, next issue. How many atheists are there out there? And that is a surprisingly tough question to answer. For one thing, in my experience, people's religious views tend to be complicated. I know many people who go to a Christian church every Sunday because they were raised that way, or because it makes their mom happy, or because they like to meet people, and yet they're not sure whether the God of the Bible exists for real. Are they Christian? Are they agnostic? Are they hypocrites? It is hard to tell. It's also fairly common for people to grow up worshiping one religion because they're kids and no one gave them a choice, and then when they reach adulthood and they can think for themselves, they stop going to church. But then when they get old, they start going to church again because, who knows, maybe God exists after all, and they want to be on his good side as they approach death, just in case. Are these people religious? Well, that depends. The answer changes over the course of their lifetime. Another very important point is that in many countries, and for much of human history, being overtly atheist was hazardous to your health. If you doubted the existence of a god, as atheists and agnostics do, or if you try to worship a non-denominational god in your own way, as deists like to do, you could be killed in some horrific way. As a result, many doubters simply kept quiet about their beliefs to stay alive. Just ask Galileo Galilei, the Italian astronomer around 1600. He was a scientist who developed the first telescope and then realized that the solar system did not match the teachings of the church. So the church put him on trial for his ideas, and he renounced his astronomical views. In a free world, Galileo would probably have embraced views about the creation of the universe that were completely at odds with the teachings of the Catholic Church, and he may even have questioned religion in general, but we'll never know his real views because he had to shut up for fear of being put to death. Others were not so lucky. Let me give you 2 examples among many. Giordano Bruno was another Italian who, like Galileo, also believed that the earth was round and revolved around the sun. Bruno was not an atheist per se because he began his life as a Catholic friar and then he embraced Calvinism and the transmigration of souls. So a deist, I guess, or a mystic / scientist, he really believed in a lot of things. But either way, he was put on trial for rejecting various doctrines of the Catholic Church, and he was burnt at the stake in Rome in 1600. And that sent a strong message to non-conformists everywhere. Here is another famous non-religious martyr, the Chevalier de la Barre. He was a French freethinker who in 1766 didn't take off his hat when a Catholic religious procession was passing by. That may seem like a very minor thing, he just did not salute a religious procession. But his attitude was seen as blasphemy. Blasphemy means that you don't show enough respect for the dominant religion. And that was a big deal in 18th century France because the Catholic Church was so dominant at the time. As punishment, a court ordered that this young man, the Chevalier de la Barre, be tortured. Then his tongue was cut off to silence him for good, and then he was beheaded. And you might think this is old stuff, 17th, 18th century stuff. None of that would happen today. Well, you would be wrong. Apostasy is a word that means renouncing your faith. For example, saying, well, I was raised Muslim, but now that I'm an adult, I consider myself an atheist. Well, apostasy is a capital crime in several conservative Muslim countries to this day, as we speak. So even today, by law, a person can be killed for rejecting their religion and declaring themselves an atheist. Even in a country like the US, where freedom of religion is guaranteed by the Constitution, and we'll study the First Amendment in a bit, many atheists hide their belief to avoid rocking the boat. Here's just one example. In 1925, a science teacher in Tennessee named John Scopes taught Darwinism to his students because, well, teaching science is what science teachers like to do. Darwin is a father of the theory of evolution, as you know, which is embraced by 99.99% of serious biologists out there as the most convincing explanation for the origin of species. But Darwinism contradicts the book of Genesis in the Bible, which claims instead that all species were created very recently by God, rather than over millions of years by natural selection. So the state of Tennessee had a law banning the teaching of evolution because that contradicted the Bible. So John Scopes, the teacher, taught Darwinism in his classrooms anyway, and he was put on trial, and he lost. And that debate is still ongoing, by the way. In school boards all over the country, there are people trying to replace the teachings of Darwinism with so-called intelligent design, or at least teach the two theories side by side as equal. If you're not familiar with that, intelligent design argues, without scientific proof, that God was there all along to guide evolution, so it's essentially creationism by another name. Just to be clear, Scopes was not burnt at the stake in 1925, but being put on trial, paying a fine, losing your job, and being vilified by the entire state of Tennessee was not a pleasant experience for him. Most people do not want to be martyrs, especially atheists, because they don't believe in heaven, so they choose the path of least resistance. They pretend to follow the dominant religion just because it's the easier thing to do. And so when teachers today are told to teach intelligent design or display the 10 Commandments in their classroom, they may disagree with the religious agenda, but they tend to stay quiet for fear of losing the job. Now let's say you're not a science teacher like Scopes, but a politician. In 1958, a poll asked US voters if they would vote for a well-qualified candidate from their party who who happened to be atheist. Only 18% said yes. So 82% of people said they would not support a qualified politician of their own party purely on the basis of their religious belief or lack thereof. In another poll in 2015 that asked the same question, the number of Americans willing to vote for an atheist had risen to 58%. That's progress, but that means that a politician who loses 42% of the votes right off the bat if they publicly express their belief that God does not exist. So, in practice, most candidates for office prefer to hide their atheism or pretend that they're somewhat religious because that is the safest thing to do. I'll stop with all these examples. My point is that counting agnostics and atheists is like counting gay people. Most likely there have been a lot of them, like gay people, everywhere throughout history, but many remained in the closet for fear of being shunned by their family or persecuted by authorities or even killed, and that's true even today. This big caveat aside, let's now take a look at this map of world religions. Notice the pie chart at the top right. The number of agnostics is estimated there as 12% of the world's population, and the number of atheists at 2%, roughly. Add them up, and that's roughly 15% of the world's population, almost as many as the numbers of Hindus or Muslims or Catholics in the world. So that's a lot. So again, it's a very rough estimation, because non-religious people often keep their views private for their own safety. On the map itself, countries that have no dominant religion or are mostly non-religious are depicted in gray, places like Cuba, Russia, and Eastern Europe, as well as China. Notice that many of these countries are communist or formerly communist for reasons I'll explain later. But remember that religious beliefs are a complex topic. Always be wary of maps that reduce a country's religious affiliation to a simple color. On this map, South Louisiana, where I live, appears as a little speck of yellow, meaning that we are predominantly Catholic. And sure, we are the majority, that's our French and Spanish heritage, but we also have many types of Protestants around here, and there's also a synagogue and a mosque in my town, so we also have Jews and Muslims, as well as atheists, though they are easy to miss because they don't build big temples, and they tend to be quiet because being an atheist is not that well regarded in Southwest Louisiana. We'll look at Western Europe on the map. It is colored yellow or orange because traditionally Western Europe was mostly Catholic or Protestant. But I can tell you from experience that there are a lot of atheists in France where I grew up, as well as Muslims and Jews, even though they do not show up on this map because it's just the single largest denomination that is shown. Now look at that other map of Western Europe, which is a bit more precise because he depicts the percentage of people who do not believe in any sort of spirit, God, or life force, so basically atheists. The bar to the left tells you how many of them there are as a percentage. The darker the color, the more atheists in a given country. So even in a religious country like Italy, where the Pope lives in the Vatican, about 10% of the population fits that category of atheist. And you'll see the same in very Catholic countries like Ireland and Poland. And in other places like Germany, the UK, or France, we're talking 30 to 50% of the population, or even more. So going back to that overall map of the world and its religions, keep in mind that non-believers can be found everywhere around the globe, sprinkled here and there in majority Christian countries like the US or majority Muslim countries like Turkey. In other lectures, I have covered the main tenets of each faith and their history. So now let's move on to atheist thinkers and their ideas over time. I'm afraid that more caveats are in order because atheism is not a well-defined school of thought. If you want to know about Islam, well, read the Quran. Done. Do you want to know about Christianity? Read the Gospels. Done. But you can't do this for atheism because there's not a single gospel or prophet. The essence of atheism is that you should think for yourself, not follow what some bearded dude said centuries ago. And also, atheists don't have an inquisition tribunal to hunt down dissenters. Every atheist has their own ideas about God, morality, and what happens after death. And if some other atheist thinks differently, fine, because atheists are very attached to freedom of speech and religion. As a result, atheists are a loosely defined community of free thinkers. Trying to get them to agree on a core set of beliefs would be like herding cats. So what I'll do instead is highlight a few individuals and ideas that were important in the history of atheism, while keeping in mind that these people do not fit into a single organized one-size-fits-all system. I will focus on atheism in the Western intellectual tradition, Europe, the US, as well as its main foe in the Western tradition, meaning Christianity, because that's simply what I am most familiar with, but I am sure that there have been atheist thinkers in Brazil, Japan, and Turkey as well. So first on our list of Western atheists would be Socrates. We already encountered him when we studied ancient Greece. As a reminder, he was a philosopher who lived in Athens around 400 BC. He is best known for the Socratic method. Instead of writing philosophical treatises about his ideas, he would have dialogues with his contemporaries, and he tried to get to the truth by arguing issues back and forth. And that's how he liked to teach as well, by encouraging his pupils to think for themselves and question everything. Quote, "Life unexamined is not worth living," unquote. That was his motto. His ultimate goal was to find the truth, not by consulting the oracle of Delphi, but through the power of the human mind. For him, truth could not be found in the wild tales of Greek mythology. Finding the truth was a rational process, achieved through intellectual curiosity. None of that requires divine intervention, so I would put him squarely in the atheist or agnostic category. Sadly, you can also put him in the martyr category because he made many enemies when he taught young people in Athens to question authority, reject divine revelation, and think for themselves. He was put on trial in 399 BC for corrupting the youth of Athens with his dangerous ideas, as well as for impiety, not worshipping the gods. Ultimately, he was sentenced to kill himself by drinking hemlock. So the message to other atheists in ancient Greece was, if you don't agree with religion, you'd better stay in the closet. Next up, the late medieval and Renaissance era, so roughly 1200 to 1600. By this point, Western Europe was thoroughly Christian, but science was making progress as well. As people sailed around the world after 1492 and invented telescopes like Galileo, they made a number of discoveries that contradicted established Christian doctrine. The earth is not flat, they realized. There are religions out there that are not Christian. Jerusalem is not the center of the world, and in fact, the earth is not the center of the universe either. During the Renaissance, scholars in Europe also rediscovered the writings of ancient philosophers like Aristotle, whom they loved, except for one issue. Aristotle lived long before Jesus, so he was not a Christian. So how could you reconcile Christianity with those new discoveries of science and the old teachings of pagan Greek philosophers? The answer to that was a school called Scholasticism. Scholastics like to solve issues through dialectics, meaning disputation or dialogue. They would present one thesis, for example, the earth is flat and Jerusalem is its center. Then they would present the antithesis, the other point. I don't know, actually the earth is round, that's the other point. And then they would try to reconcile these two sets of beliefs and explain away the apparent contradiction. The master of this school of thought was an Italian monk called Thomas Aquinas, who is best known for his book, the Summa Theologica. Obviously, as a monk, he does not qualify as an atheist, but in his book, he also discussed contradictory intellectual traditions like Islam, ancient Greek pagans, new scientific discoveries of his age, and he was willing to openly debate them, because that's what scholastics do. But then he concluded that all these seeming contradictions were actually compatible with mainstream Christianity, because he was a monk. So in other words, scholasticism used logic and reasoning, but to prove in the end that God does exist after all, and that the church is right. If you're interested in such attempts to rationalize religion, to prove it through science and reasoning, I would suggest looking at other early modern philosophers like René Descartes. Just look for the term cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Or another French philosopher called Blaise Pascal. Just look for Pascal's wager. Again, these three men were not atheists, but they tried to turn religion into a more logical, scientific process rather than a blind acceptance of revelation. Next up on our journey, the Enlightenment, my favorite period. And that term refers to the period in the 18th century when many philosophers in Western Europe debated notions like liberty, equality, the rights of man, reason, and democracy. In that sense, they fought back against the system of their time, which was absolute monarchy by divine right. Back then, kings ruled with absolute power in alliance with the church. Instead of that, Enlightenment philosophers pushed for greater freedoms for individuals, including, crucially for us, freedom of religion. One of these Enlightenment philosophers was a Frenchman named Voltaire. He wrote about a lot of things, but his biggest pet peeve was religious intolerance. The Catholic Church was dominant in 18th century France, so Voltaire hated how that church censored books he didn't like his own, or refused to bury people who had been critical of the church. The Catholic Church was the only official church, so that meant that Jews and Protestants could not openly practice their faith. Atheism was viewed as even more dangerous than Judaism or Protestantism. Remember the case of the Chevalier de la Barre, who was put to death for blasphemy around the same time. Philosophers like Voltaire argued for freedom of religion, the right to worship the God of your choice, even if it's Judaism or Protestantism, or no God at all if you're atheist. They also argued for the separation of church and state, i.e. the government should not favor one religion over the others, and one particular religion, the Catholic Church in that case, should not have secular powers. These were not just ideas by a few philosophers like Voltaire. In the late 18th century, a number of revolutions broke out that were directly inspired by Enlightenment philosophers. It's called the Age of Revolutions. You're probably familiar with the American Revolution from 1775 onward, and the French Revolution starting in 1789. The key document of the American Revolution is the U.S. Constitution. It established a form of government based on popular will. U.S. presidents would rule because they were elected by the people, not because they were anointed by God. And that government was also secular. The Constitution does not argue in favor of a specific religion or God. And I'd like to use that opportunity to correct a common misconception. Religious conservatives today in the U.S. often insist that the government should favor Christianity because the U.S. is, in their words, a Christian country. Well, it is a country where a majority of people are Christians, sure, but the government of that country, the government of the U.S., is definitely not Christian. Read the Constitution. Nowhere does it mention the word Christian or Jesus. The U.S. government was secular by design. That was a big point for the early founding fathers, many of whom were deists. The key passage on religion in the U.S. Constitution is to be found in the Bill of Rights, a series of amendments that define basic freedoms for all Americans. From the very get-go, the very beginning of Article 1, they deal with that key issue. What is the place of religion in the U.S. government? So let's read it together. Quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Well, that means two things. First, there is no established religion, i.e. the government cannot favor a particular religion, like Episcopal Christianity. That is called the Non-Establishment Clause. Second, in that article, you notice that the government cannot prevent you from worshiping the religion of your choice, and that is called freedom of religion. Let's run through some practical application of that First Amendment in the U.S. I'll pause for a second after each scenario. You may pause the video longer if you want to think about it before I give you the answer. Question number 1. Can the U.S. government say the country is majority Christian, so Muslims and Jews should not be allowed to run for public office? No, there is no religious test for political candidates. Question number 2. Can the government say some religions like Judaism and Islam are well established, so they are worthy of protection, but some silly religions like Voodoo or Mormonism are just ludicrous and should not exist? No. It is not the government's place to decide which religion is right or wrong. Question number 3. Can a public school say we will start every meal at the cafeteria by saying graces, or we'll have some public prayers at the beginning of the day? No. A public school cannot pressure students into doing a Christian prayer. Though in practice, I've attended many public meetings in Louisiana that start with a Christian prayer, even though this is unconstitutional. All those examples were pretty cut and dry, but there are many gray areas. What about putting a nativity scene outside in a public park just because it's Christmas? What about telling a Christian baker that he should cater gay weddings whether he likes it or not, because homophobia and discrimination are illegal by law? What about a coach at a public school who likes to pray on the football field before each game and kinda expects the players to follow along and pray with him, but does not overtly force them to pray with him? All these issues are a bit more complicated, so the Supreme Court has a long jurisprudence on the matter, and I'll let you dig into those cases if you're a pre-law major. I focus on the First Amendment to the American Constitution, but that notion of 1, freedom of religion, and 2, separation of church and state are firmly established in many other Western countries. The key document of the French Revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, also has an article guaranteeing freedom of religion, and in 1905, the French Parliament passed a law on the separation of church and state. All right, next stop on our journey, the scientific revolution. From the 17th century onward, science made great strides in fields like geology, biology, and astronomy. So by the 19th century, some geologists like Mary Anning realized that the Earth is old, like very old. Not just thousands of years old or millions, but billions of years old, roughly 4.5 billion years for the Earth. This contradicted the Old Testament, which suggests, when you add up all the years in the text, that the Earth and all its inhabitants were created by God about 6,000 years ago. Also, geology is explained by natural scientific processes like plate tectonics, not some divine intervention like Noah and the Great Flood. Also, as people dug up fossils, they also noticed that the type of fossils changed depending on the layer, i.e. the deeper that you dig, meaning the further back in time you go, the more likely you are to encounter remnants of species that no longer exist today. And that also contradicts the Bible, because all species are supposed to have been created by God altogether in just a couple of days. Well, in the 19th century, the theory of evolution by Darwin explained that fossil record by stating that species evolved through natural selection, the survival of the fittest, not divine intervention as stated in Genesis. And that process took time. Early hominids, our ancestors as humans, are over 3 million years old, for example, which was not in keeping with the official time frame of the Bible, which is just 6,000 years old. By the 20th century, astronomers also developed the Big Bang theory. The central idea is that the universe is expanding as we speak, ergo it used to be much smaller than it is today. And if you go back far enough in time, the entire universe was concentrated into one single speck of matter of infinite density. That theory also contradicts the biblical narrative on the origin of the universe. It's explained by nuclear physics, not divine intervention. The timeline also contradicts the Bible. The Big Bang happened almost 14 billion years ago, according to astronomers, not 6,000 years ago, according to Genesis. As a result, many 19th century scientists distanced themselves from their religion. Here's a quote by Darwin, the father of evolution, from 1879. Quote, "I've never been an atheist in the sense of denying the existence of God, but I think that generally an agnostic would be the most correct description of my state of mind." Unquote. If you're interested in that topic, I would encourage you to look further into the 19th century philosophical school of positivism, which argued that real knowledge should be acquired through reason, logic, and science rather than intuition or revelation. Positivism was very popular among 19th century and early 20th century scholars like Marie Curie. In a way, you could say that those people now worshipped science instead of religion. Let's now shift to another important intellectual development of the 19th century, the rise of communism. The key thinker here is Karl Marx, the author of Das Kapital from Germany. He was an economist and a political philosopher, so his main concern was not geology or biology. He was more interested in the plight of the working class. Communists like him want to defend the proletariat, blue-collar workers like coal miners, from what they call the bourgeoisie, the idle rich who are trying to exploit the working class. So what does that have to do with religion, you might ask? Well, Karl Marx argued that religion historically was used by the rich to justify their dominance. Oh, you have to obey me because I'm not just a king, but a divinely inspired king. Also, religion helped to keep the poor quiet. Oh, your life sucks, but don't worry, there will be a heaven where all the wrongs will be righted and the last shall be first. In the meantime, just keep working and be quiet. That was the message. Marx was raised Jewish, but he was an atheist as an adult. To him, there was no God. His message to the poor was, do not believe in such fairy tales. If you want your life to get better, do not wait for heaven because it doesn't exist. Make things right on earth right now because this life on earth is the only one you got. The key quote from Marx on that topic is, quote, religion is the opium of the people, unquote. Religion is a soothing drug, a lie invented to prevent the poor from revolting against the rich. The ideas of Karl Marx, like those of 18th century Enlightenment philosophers, had a huge impact in history. Many communist regimes emerged in the 20th century, from Soviet Russia to Castro's Cuba and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. All these regimes were typically atheists, non-religious. Some were even anti-clerical because they actively persecuted believers. China is still communist today, and it continues to persecute religions that Chinese authorities deem to be a threat, like Buddhism in Tibet. Let's finish our journeys through atheist thought with a contemporary writer, Richard Dawkins. He is a biologist by training, but is best known for his militant atheism. He's debated Christian conservatives in open forums and has written a bestseller called The God Delusion. So let's go through a few points that he makes in the book. He usually starts with the Christian argument in favor of God, and then he debunks it, kind of like Scholasticism in the Middle Ages, except that in his case, he concludes that God doesn't exist, of course, he's an atheist. All right, argument number one from the pro-religion camp. Religion has produced a lot of good things in history, like beautiful art, the Pietà, great buildings, Notre Dame, or church-run charities, so it is a net positive. Answer by Dawkins, well, the fact that some churches feed the homeless is great, but that doesn't prove that God exists. Also, religion has led to many negative outcomes in history. Some unexpected, like the Spanish Inquisition, but also the Crusades, 9/11, burning Giordano Bruno at the stake, you name it. So overall, religion is a net negative for Dawkins. Argument number two from the religious camp. Religion provides an ethical framework, like the Ten Commandments, that guides people towards better behavior. The answer by Dawkins, well, a lot of overtly religious people have done terrible things like pedophilia or terrorism, even though they act holier than thou, so there is no evidence that religion is effective at teaching good morals. Also, Dawkins would argue that atheists have their own sense of ethics. That's what secular humanism is all about. In fact, that is a superior sense of ethics because the atheists don't need a God to tell them not to steal or kill or cheat. They do it because it's right. They don't need some divine punishment like hell to do the right thing. They do it because it's right. Argument number three from the religious camp, without a God or the promise of heaven, life would be lonely and terrifying. Answer by Dawkins, well, saying that you would really like it if you could go to heaven with angels, well, that's fine, but it's not a logical proof that heaven indeed exists. I'd really like it if Santa Claus still existed, because Christmas was much more fun as a child when I believed that Santa Claus was real and flying in the sky and loved me very, very much and gave me presents. But spoiler alert, Santa Claus does not exist. Same thing with God. Argument number four from the pro-religion camp, religion provides a set of answers about life's many questions. The reply by Richard Dawkins in the book is that sure, religion provides answers, but many of them are proven to be scientifically false. Also, Dawkins complained that religion discourages scientific curiosity. Why are there different species? Why do we have phases of the moon? Where do stars come from? Religion provides a simplistic explanation like Genesis and stops there, whereas science is always encouraging people to find answers. And if it turns out that a particular theory is wrong, scientists are willing to admit it and start again from scratch by looking at the evidence. I could go on about this book for a while, but you get his point. All this brings us all the way to present time, so it is now time for some closing remarks, and I have two main points to make. The first is that all of this is an ongoing debate. You may think that the Scopes trial is just a silly thing from the 1920s, but the battle over the place of religion in US politics is still ongoing today. One of the key debates in America today is about abortion, and that's largely a battle between a devout pro-life camp and a more secular pro-choice camp. I'm taping this lecture in Louisiana in 2024, and the governor just signed a law that requires every public classroom in the state to display the 10 Commandments. If you remembered what we covered on the First Amendment and the separation of church and state, the law is clearly unconstitutional. Under the Non-Establishment Clause, a governor cannot force students and teachers to embrace his Judeo-Christian agenda. So, surprise, history matters. The debates of the past inform the debates of today. The second point I would like to make is that religious fervor tends to be declining in developed countries. That's especially true in Europe and East Asia. Remember that map with the number of atheists in Western Europe. But increasingly, that is also the case in America as well, where atheism and its variants are the fastest growing religion, quote unquote, recently. Anyway, stay tuned. Today's world might be informed by the debates of the past, but we are not completely bound by history. Our world is also a changing place. I like to end my lectures by suggesting some relevant movies, and there are not many overtly atheistic movies out there in Western cinema because movie studios are always afraid to offend religious audiences. So I can only think of 2 movies that directly fit today's theme about atheism. The first is a movie called Inherit the Wind, which is about the 1925 Scopes trial, and it's very good. And finally, a personal favorite of mine, Monty Python's Life of Brian, which had to be financed privately by one of the Beatles because making fun of religious zealots and spoofing the life of Jesus was too controversial for mainstream studios. Well, that's it for today. And remember, always look on the bright side of life.